afternoon, good evening, depending on where you might be joining us from in the world today. My name is Meg Alexander. I am, as always, excited and honored to get to host another Power to Fly Chat and Learn session. Now, before we dive into questions or introduce you to our speakers, I just want to go over a couple quick housekeeping items, especially important if maybe this is your first Power to Fly event. If that's the case, then hi, we're so happy to meet you. Now, the love for our frequent flyers is no less real, y'all. We are so happy to see familiar names, faces, avatars in the chat. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Now, what you should know is that our events are all about you. They're about our community members and making sure that you all get the value that you came to get from today's event. So to further that and make sure that you all get the most out of today as you can, we want to encourage you to participate. You can do that in a couple different ways. If you would like to, you're welcome to turn your cameras on, share your smiling, maskless faces with us safely. But really, y'all, there is no pressure to be Instagram perfect, okay? I know that I actually washed my hair today, so fancy, but truly, we don't care if you're coming to us from a corner office or your living room couch. It makes no difference to us. We want to be there. We want to meet you where you are so that you can learn from us no matter what. Now, if you don't want to turn your cameras on or you're just not feeling it today, that's completely fine. You don't have to have a camera to participate. You can always chime in the chat as well. Our group chat is over there and open. I do want to encourage everybody. Oh, let's see, we've got people from Lansing, Austin, Argentina. Please feel free, share with us where you're joining us from in the world today. I'm coming to you from Toledo, Ohio. This is land that belonged to the Fox, Kickapoo, and Potawatomi tribes in my area. So please feel free, let us know where you're dialing in from. And if you know, you're welcome to share whose land you're on. Now, the big thing to know about our participation in the chat is that we want you to ask questions, add comments, let us know how you're feeling about what we're talking about. As always, we want to proceed with kindness and respect as we are integrating and interacting with our fellow attendees and our guest speakers. But if you've got questions, send them in, y'all. We want to make sure that you get value from today's event. You're taking the time to be here with us live, and we want to make sure that you are rewarded for that. So ask early, ask often. If you have a question that you wrote in and you're not sure if we're going to get to it, ask it in the chat. Maybe we're talking about a term or like an acronym or something that isn't really clear to you, or you want us to dive in deeper on it. Ask it in the chat. That way we can make sure that whatever you came to get from today's event, you have before you leave. The other thing I want to remind y'all about is that today's event is being live streamed to YouTube and our website as well. Hi, YouTube. But we're also recording it, and we're going to post this recording in the coming days. Now, what that means for you is you get to relax. You get to kick back, enjoy the conversation that I'm about to have with Malia and Grace, and really enjoy it, not feel like you have to take notes or worry if you missed a resource that someone listed. You can always go back and rewatch this recording later on. Now, what's going to happen is everybody that registered, y'all are going to get an email from us in about probably 4 to 5 business days, so early next week, with the link to where you can rewatch this recording when it's posted on powertofly.com. Now, I know that can be a very long time to wait, especially if Malia or Grace says something today just so mind-blowing that you can't wait to share it with someone. You're laughing now, Malia, but this happens every time I'm on these chats. Even after 4 years, there's always something new I learn. Yes, huge. So let's say that something mind-blowing is said and you have to tell a friend or coworker or a relative and you don't want to wait 4 to 5 days. That's okay. You can head to our YouTube channel. I'll share links for all of this in the chat as we go. But you can head to our YouTube channel. The video is usually posted there by 5 to 15 minutes after the end of the live stream. There is a huge section of, we have an archive over there with a bunch of past chats and past recordings that you can check out. But I also recommend that you check out the website, because that is where the huge, we're talking Indiana Jones levels of just resources stacked on top. The archives are huge, y'all. We have Meet the Recruiter videos. We've got chat and learns like this. We've got everything from the beginning of Lunch and Learns with Lauren Haggerty through today. And it's all it's all there for you to utilize and, get the most out of these resources. So I very much recommend you check out the website as well. But, now there's a couple different ways you can review this video or share it later on if you'd like. Like I said, please feel free to chime in the chat if you've got questions. If you have a question or a comment that you'd like to raise, but you want to be kept anonymous, no worries. Just DM it to me. You can find my name, Meg Alexander, in the drop down in your Zoom chat feature. All right, now before I introduce you to our amazing speakers, I wanted to highlight that they are here today on behalf of Expedia Group. Now I'll share links for all of this in the chat as we go. But what you're seeing right now is Expedia Group's company page on powertofly.com. Now, once you get here, you can find out some really amazing information about Expedia Group there. Overview is going to have information like their company culture, some of the benefits, like, perks of the jobs. If the events tab is where you're going to see recordings of past events, like the one we're making today, as well as registration pages if they have an event planned with us in the future. So you can always check that out. And then, as always, there are the jobs tabs. That is where everybody wants, where the real money is. We want to go there and check out all the open roles within the Expedia Group. So if there's anything there that catches your eye, I really, really encourage you to click that follow button. It's big, pink. It's at the top header of the page. Clicking that follow button does some really great things for you, but effectively what it does is it works like your friend who already works at Expedia Group. So you're effectively telling that person like, hey, I'm interested in working with Expedia Group, even before you fill out an application, which is really nice. And it also makes it so that Power to Fly can take the lift off of you in your job search, because we're going to let you know when Expedia Group posts new roles. So that way you don't have to keep coming back and checking and rechecking job boards that you have basically memorized after, 4 or 5 rotations. So we're going to kind of take some of that lift off of you there. Now, you can follow and unfollow as many companies as you'd like on Power to Fly. You can follow and unfollow the same company as many times as you would like. Now, obviously, I recommend you check out Expedia Group, but that follow button is a really good resource if you are actively seeking, but don't really see anything right now that really fits what you're going for or the roles you want. Clicking that follow button is an excellent idea. It's also a really smart thing to do if you are not currently job seeking, because that way later on, when you do get curious and want to know what opportunities are out there, you can come back to Power to Fly and you already have a short list of companies that really walk the walk as well as talk the talk when it comes to DEIB. So I really encourage you to take advantage of some of those features of the website. Now, I'm very excited to introduce you to our speakers today. So first up, we have Malia Taito joining us. Now, Malia has been with Expedia Group's market management team since October of 2012. Her day-to-day role is leading the Hawaii market management team, who are primarily responsible for account management, strategy implementation, and planning with lodging partners within the Hawaii market. Now, Malia is also the co-founder and current global president of IDEA, which is Indigenous, Diversity, Expedians, and Allies. It's one of 8 of Expedia Group's inclusive business groups. Malia, we're so happy to have you join us on the stage today. Is there anything else you want to share with our audience?
Thank you, Meg. Aloha kakahiaka, and good morning from Hawaii. So my name again is Malia Taito. I am a Pacific Islander woman. I have a green shirt and white shirt, and my acronyms are she, her, and Hoya. And I would also be remiss to not mention the land acknowledgement for which I reside and live on, acknowledging Hawaii as an Indigenous space, whose today's people are known as Kanaka Maoli, or Native Hawaiians, and I am currently on the Aina, which we gather is on the Mokupuni of Oahu, and that is on the Pai Aina of Hawaii. So thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you so much for that land acknowledgement as well as visual description. I always forget one or the other. So very, very excellent. I love that. And in case anybody wants it, my name's Meg. My pronouns are she and her. I am a middle-aged white lady with purple and pink hair and pink glasses and a white shirt. All right, now joining Malia today is going to be Grace Ray. Now, Grace has been with Expedia Group since 2016 and she's been located in their Melbourne and Sydney offices in Australia. Now, Grace is currently in a gig role in the Global Cross-Brand Strategic Initiatives team within their social media org. She's technically on loan from the Traveler Engagement and Loyalty team, so the TEAL team. Now, Grace is the current Global Vice President of IDEA, that's Indigenous, Diversity, Expedians, and Allies. And in addition to being one of the founding ambassadors of their Australian Reconciliation Action Plan. Now, Grace, I'm very excited to bring you to the stage as well. Is there anything else you would like our audience to know about you today?
Thank you so much. My name is Grace and I am wearing a black top and with blonde hair. I am from Sydney, Australia, so it's nighttime here, so I have my shutters closed. And yeah, I would like to also start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm privileged and honored to work on every day, both in my home and the nearby Expedia office, is on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Beautiful, beautiful land. If anyone's been to Sydney, highly recommend checking out all the incredible sites because we're so lucky to live here. And yeah, that's me on the page. There's a few acronyms on there. Expedia loves an acronym, so I'm always happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
And I just saw, apologies, y'all, I did mean to give you a little bit more information about Expedia Group in case you haven't heard of them or aren't sure exactly what they do. At Expedia Group, they believe that travel can be a force for good. They're here to build great products and facilitate connections between travelers and their partners that truly bring good into the world. Now, at Expedia Group, you'll discover a world of passionate people, all guided by inclusive purpose to strengthen connections, broaden horizons, and bridge divides. Now, if you would like to join their team, I really encourage you to visit their page at powertofly.com. I'm going to grab this link from my script here and send it to y'all, so that way you have a little bit more information as well. All right, now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We'll highlight my fabulous guest speakers up here and get to starting on our questions. Again, do not forget, y'all are always welcome to submit questions, add comments, let us know how you're feeling. Maybe your lived experience is different. So please feel free to do that throughout the upcoming conversation. All right, first question I want to talk to y'all about. Let's dive deeper into the story behind August 9th, which is the International Day of the World's Indigenous People. I want to know what is this? What should we know if we've never heard about this, at all before?
Yeah, so in 1994, the United Nations General Assembly designated August 9th as the International Day of World's Indigenous People Day. So this marks the date of the first meeting in 1982 of the United Nations Working Group on Indigenous populations. So that's the formality of this day. And I think since then, there's been a lot of additional observances and celebrations that have been created. You might have heard of in California, they do celebrate the Indigenous Peoples Day on a different day, and that marks the 500th, the anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival. So now a lot of states have dubbed that as well as Indigenous Peoples Day. So it's evolving and forever evolving in terms of there's so many Indigenous communities and populations that are represented. It's hard to have just one day to celebrate these communities, but August 9th is the formal United Nations recognition of that day. But again, and I think Grace has more perspective in some of our APAC regions, and that day differs from regional and global perspectives as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like Indigenous people all around the world have like similar experiences and heritage, but they're all wildly different and unique. And I think the local days are almost more important, especially if you are based in those areas, because it's an opportunity to perform acts of like reconciliation and educate yourself. So in Australia, for example, we have 2 key weeks, not even days, weeks. We have a Reconciliation Week and NAIDOC Week. NAIDOC Week is very much like celebrating Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities in Australia, whereas Reconciliation Week is more about that act of reconciliation and understanding what you as an individual, business, community can do to reconcile with the First Nations people of Australia. So there's so many different days. Like New Zealand has their own day. Every country that Canada definitely has their own day as well. There's so many. But it's great to have a day that sort of unites everyone as a global opportunity. But I think, yeah, those local days are really important.
I love that. And I very much appreciate that, that the celebration or the observance can be divided like that. You know what I mean? So that there is equal respect and equal time given, but the purpose of the day itself is not lost because of the mix of the two. So I think that is really, really lovely and important to not only celebrate the culture, but also recognize what happened. It was some pretty messed up stuff, right? Yeah, it was messed up. So like, as long as we're still continuing that conversation, it's like, all right, is it going to hurt you to talk about how that was messed up and we're not going to do it again? No, it's not. So we're going to do it. We're going to talk. We're going to keep talking and keep having these conversations. Okay. If people are maybe not as familiar with the idea of, reconciliation or some of the ideas surrounding this, let's talk a little bit about cultural continuity. It as a concept, I think we should probably kind of explain it, give us a baseline understanding of it. But let's talk about what this actually is and why it's important.
Awesome. Yeah. So for IDEA, which is Indigenous Diversity, Expedients, and Allies, which is one of 8 of Expedia's inclusive business groups. So we do represent Indigenous communities as well as our allies throughout the entire year. But Expedia, graciously, we have an entire month to really designate our entire weeks of celebrating, acknowledging Indigenous communities. So with that, we created the theme for our Global Observance Month, which is, like you mentioned, cultural continuity. And this was a collaborative effort. It's Grace and I are the vice president and president. We have the Indigenous as well as allies perspective, creating these themes and creating events and opportunities for Indigenous populations, as well as the allies that support us, which is so important because there are more allies than Indigenous people at Expedia. So their voices are amplifying ours in that sense. So we created this theme of cultural continuity, which we're so excited about. As you all know, Indigenous communities and people are kind of at a crossroads of globalization, land acknowledgements, upholding ancestral knowledge, and that has evolved significantly in the last millennium of land being taken, culture being taken, language. So with that, that is, pushed the boundaries of our ancestral ties to our land and the cultural values that we represent. So we as Expedia Group, we are one of the world's largest travel platforms. So we feel, and within our inclusive business group, that we have this huge responsibility to educate our employees as well as our travelers of those cultural values that Indigenous people represent and continue that knowledge in the work that we do in our everyday lives, in the the connections that we have and in the communities that we're thriving in. Ancestral ties have huge value in that of how we treat each other, how we treat our families, how we respect our community, our land. Those are all from our ancestors. So we really want to ask the question of, in the sense of cultural continuity, of what ancestor do you strive to be, or what kind of ancestor do you strive to be? You might have been removed, taken, have no idea what your identity is at this point, but it all rooted from Indigenous people and communities. And that cultural value is that cultural continuity that we strive to continue in everything that we do. So
I think you made a really good point, and Grace, you've got something amazing to say as well. But I want to make sure we focus on Malia, what you said about the continuity and how Indigenous populations have had their history and had their culture, in some cases completely stripped from them, in other cases withheld from them entirely. And so I do think it is really important, especially if, like myself, you are not from an Indigenous community or you're not from an underrepresented demographic within there. It's something you should understand, because you might not experience it personally, and probably you won't, but it's a huge consideration. Think about the stories that you know about yourself. You can say like, oh yeah, my grandparents or my great grandparents or whatever were from X, Y, and Z places. There are plenty of people who cannot say that because that has been taken from them by someone else or by a system. And so I love this idea of not only are we recognizing those things and trying to bring them back to that place of importance and respect, but also recognizing that the people that don't have any understanding of this still need to respect that. So I think that is really, really interesting. JJ chimed in saying very often it's our literal existence that's the proof of our continuity, that we're not lost peoples or former civilizations. Huge. Thank you so much, JJ, for sharing that. Grace, I'm sorry, I interrupted before you could answer about cultural continuity and its significance for y'all.
I feel like Malia touched on it so well and summarized it amazingly. So I don't have too much to add outside of Also, like climate events have been a huge impact, especially of recent years, on a lot of remote and Indigenous communities. And I think that that's also something we've been trying to focus a lot on this month, is educating our colleagues about what that means, and the ties that Indigenous communities do have to Mother Earth or to land. And we've been launching lots of like philanthropy efforts, and we're working with a village in Fiji who houses climate refugees. And just that term of climate refugee was foreign to a lot, and it's essentially families who have been displaced purely from climate events. So like storm surges or rising sea levels, those sorts of things that unfortunately are really common concerns that Indigenous communities have faced all around the world. Like look at the Maui fires just recently as well. So it's also about that camaraderie and continuity, like within community, of supporting one another and understanding the impacts of these events that have unfortunately like continued to take place and only get worse. So yeah, I just wanted to add that thought, because it's a really hot topic within in Indigenous communities at the moment, and this space is climate.
Yeah, I'm absolutely loving that term too. Climate refugee really does change the perspective on it. I mean, you've heard of people being religious refugees or political refugees, but yeah, climate refugee definitely brings it into focus. It reminds me of the similar shift I felt when I first heard it specified as enslaved peoples, as opposed to discussing like slaves in the history of America. And like when you stop using it as a terminology and you understand that it is something that was done to people, it's like, oh, okay, we don't like, I can't even explain the revelation that happens there. So I very much appreciate this term and you sharing it with us, Grace. Okay, let's say you work someplace where this sort of recognition is not a thing. It's because it's just, you don't think that this applies to your demographic, if it's just not a subject that's come up in your workplace before. What are some steps that people can use to try and bring some of this awareness into their workplaces?
When we started creating our idea IBG, or some other companies refer to them as like ERGs, we really realized that there was a gap in education, especially like throughout some of our, because we're a global company, like throughout some of our EMEA offices in Europe, where Indigenous ties aren't as prominent or clear. And I think that like just the level of education was different, as opposed to someone from Hawaii or Canada or Australia or New Zealand, where we're living and breathing this like reconciliation piece regularly, because there's a huge way to go. And so yeah, we really had to start with education. Like we did a bunch of surveys to understand like our base level of insight, and we found like some colleagues didn't even realize that like Indigenous populations were everywhere. Like they thought they were specific to, like Native Americans or Aboriginals, like in Australia. Like they didn't realize there's this whole world of amazing and like incredible communities all over the world. So yeah, we really set a foundational opportunity for allies to come in and to learn. And it's been great for people to have that excitement to want to learn about these communities. And unfortunately, as you said, Meg, like there's a lot of things to learn that aren't roses and happy situations. So there's that piece as well. Like we're balancing celebrating these communities with also that foundational knowledge of understanding the heritage and where we've come from and our ancestors, and to bridge that divide. So I think education, in one word, is definitely where to start, and bringing everyone into that opportunity to learn.
Yeah. Oh, you make a very good point, is that, we want to recognize like, the mess that the past can be in a lot of ways, but we also, it's very much just as important to focus like to celebrate the culture, right? It's not just about the horrors that are done to people, but it's also like what they do in response to or in spite of or whatever. So it really is important to recognize both of those aspects of this. All right, so we called out at the beginning of our meeting, we've started to do land recognitions, right? So that if you're unaware of this or you're not sure about the term, like me telling you where I'm located in the continental US, And then following it up with, this was land that belonged to, and it was, three of the bigger tribes in my area, Fox, Potawatomi, and Kickapoo. What should people know about doing land recognitions? And do you think that they should become more common? Do you think there's like certain areas where they should be kind of required? Malia, you want to start us off on here?
Sure. There's I think we have a lot of questions in our community of, oh, can you give us a land acknowledgement for Canada? Can you give us a land acknowledgement for Seattle? And I'm like, I don't live there. I am aware of the Indigenous communities that are there. So there's no formality to land acknowledgements in terms of acknowledging the existing and First Nations people of the places that you are residing on. So you really have to take the step of educating and having this genuine curiosity to understand the places that you're going and do the research and take the time to understand those communities, which is a quick Google search, which is utilizing resources from the United Nations or the native governances in your respective areas. And there's a lot of resources out there, and formulating something that is respectful, of course, and obviously highlighting that Indigenous people are not a relic of the past. We are existing today and thriving in today's world. So this isn't something that is past tense or historical. This is very much in the present and an integral part of our future as well. And I think most importantly, land acknowledgements, I think for most of inclusion and diversity perspectives within companies, this is not a checkbox of we're done, we have acknowledged Indigenous people, that is it. So this is merely a starting point to your discovery and realization of the people that were there before you, and then taking it a step further. So that's supporting Indigenous organizations, donating money and philanthropy efforts to Indigenous communities, committing to returning land, being a part of the conversation for like state legislative or any governing affairs that are related to Indigenous rights and people. So it's obviously taking it one step further. So the land acknowledgement is just the starting point, and then it's the steps after that are far more impactful and long-term in the sustainability of like our culture and the people that we represent. And it's, as Grace mentioned before, it's this education piece of continuing to acknowledge and recognize, and land acknowledgements are a great way to do that in the simplest form of just acknowledging where you are. So
yeah. In Australia, like it has become in some situations like a checkbox. Like for example, all of our government officials like need to start with a land acknowledgement, and some of them are amazing, and they really mean it, and they are like educating themselves on the land in which they're presenting, because in Australia there's hundreds and hundreds. So but yeah, it because it has become that like formal piece, I think that the meaning does get lost. So I think it's been great to see more and more countries deliver land acknowledgement, because as they start to do them, it really is based on that like really education and learning about which incredible land like you have the opportunity to speak from that day. And as you said, Malia, we also in Australia, we recognize both the elders of past, present, and emerging. Not everyone acknowledges the emerging, but present is really important because they are existing people. They're not just of the past, and it's important to recognize that they still are living and breathing people of our community that we want to celebrate. So and acknowledge. So yeah.
No, I think you made wonderful points. These are not historical peoples, right? We're not talking about the Atlanteans or something. Like, we're talking about people who existed at a certain point in time and still continue to, whether or not they've been written out of the mainstream narrative or not. And it is really important, especially, I come to you from a Western perspective, right? I live in America, I have my entire life. And so at least from my perspective, there's a lot of like, just kind of intentional ignorance in a way. And, you get to the point where there's places that have been completely renamed for, no apparent reason, or we're still using horrible, like anglicized versions of whatever the traditional names were for places. And I think it is really important to utilize that, like you said, as a way of raising that awareness, because if you don't remember your history, you're not necessarily you're bound to repeat it, but like you need to know these things. And it really does give you a definite different perspective because, you know, this isn't like the new world, right? It's not like the white people came and we just made everything. It's like, no, 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 no. That's not how this went down. So let's recognize that as we're talking about this. I mean, truly, there's really cool stuff to be learned about where you sit in this place and time that you probably were never told in, you know, 5th grade social studies. So very, very important to talk about this. And I love the idea of like making it more common, but not letting it lose the efficacy or lose the meaning behind it. Definitely a hard line to walk, but something we should all strive to do.
Sorry, Meg, just one thing to add.
No, go for it.
I think at the end of the day, just remembering starting somewhere is better than not trying or doing it at all. So we're not always going to be correct. We're not always going to be as impactful as we would like to be, but it is a starting point, and that is what's primarily important. So if it's not via a land acknowledgement, it's through additional steps such as, you know, researching and just having that curiosity. So again, just start somewhere, and land acknowledgements are a great place to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can fall down a click hole about Taylor Swift's shoe choices just as easily as you can fall down a click hole on like, so what exactly was the War of 1812 about? I don't know. So like, truly, there are ways that we can do this, even if it's just, you know, 30 seconds that you spend like skimming a Wikipedia article, it's still more information than you knew earlier. So I like this idea and encouragement to like explore that curiosity. You don't have to write a dissertation on it just because you don't know the answer right now. So, you know, keep these things in mind.
Or also like shopping with First Nations or Indigenous owned businesses. I feel
Yes.
like it's a really great way to sort of learn more about how that cultural continuity, again, like how their culture is represented today, and how there's amazing artists and first like and business owners who are embracing their culture in really cool ways that you can learn about as well and celebrate by supporting their business.
Yes, 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 yes. Ally is a verb. It does not always have to have money attached to it, but let's be real, it's a little bit more helpful when it does. So absolutely cannot champion that cause enough. Okay, let's talk about some of this action. So ally is a verb, but we want to be able to say that we're doing this in a real way and not just performative. So how can people make sure that they are not coming off as performative, or they're not sticking to, you know, the shiny happy bits of trying to trying to include the Indigenous communities that they, you know, that they have impact with. Malia, do you want to start us?
Yeah, and I think we talked about land acknowledgements being a checkbox and really having these very intentional action items. And I think I mentioned it's using past, present, and future tenses with Indigenous people, not referring to us as historical or communities that no longer exist. We are very much present and active within our communities and fighting harder, maybe not harder. Everyone has their fight that they're fighting, correct? So I think we're constantly fighting this battle to be acknowledged and be recognized. And I think, as we've mentioned, it's using appropriate language and not sugarcoating the past and what has happened. So using terms like genocide, stolen land, colonization. I remember in one of our first global observance events a couple of years ago, I used the word colonization with the VP of our company. And I was like, ooh, that might have been a little touchy or a little sensitive, but that's the reality of the situation. It's factual. It's actually what happened historically. So I think being comfortable and using the appropriate language and factually being accurate on the historical context of the Indigenous populations and experiences that we had and are still experiencing today. It's part of that education and acknowledgement piece that this is very much a reality and not so much a historical thing that you might have missed. In Hawaii, we were learned to celebrate Statehood Day without identifying the illegal occupation of the state, but we were forced to celebrate Statehood Day. So having that opportunity to learn and really acknowledging that and being more vocal with our youth, especially due to the lack of education that is provided in today's schooling, that is huge and key to our success in the future.
Yes, of course. Grace, do you want to chime in?
I love that you mentioned the youth part, Malia, because it's, yeah, like we, in most countries, I know Meg, you also mentioned like what you learn in high school or primary school. It's, most people on this call like would be a similar sort of age group, I imagine, and we were taught much different things at school than what our next generations are learning. It's really great to see that like students of in Australia, for example, like they're growing up learning like what I think land acknowledgement is. Like I know more 3-year-olds who can say land acknowledgement than I do like 60 plus age group, and they know so much more about when I mentioned like NAIDOC week and reconciliation week, like they really embrace those times. Like when I was in school, that wasn't the case. We were taught in school that like the English were the first people in Australia, right? And it was a peaceful record, like peaceful arrival. And it's just absurd to think that now, knowing everything we do know. And I think that a lot of countries, like they don't even have the First Nations or Indigenous people recognized as the first people on that country in the constitutions. And it's there's so much way to go, but I do think that future generations coming up below us are definitely getting a slightly better education at school. I know it's the same in Canada as well, learning about those like mass burial sites and the genocides that were faced in Canada. And I think that it's just really important to grow up as an ally, having that correct understanding of history, and then at Expedia, like bringing it back as well to the company and what you can do to be an ally. Like we launch a lot of like allyship trainings for all of our IBGs that cover all diversity and inclusion groups. So it's a great place too, just to understand like how to use language and to not shy away from facts and to invite people in rather than calling them out, and how to avoid like tokenism and those sorts of things. So yeah, there is a lot of things you can do, but it all comes back to education again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, luckily, I don't think today's kids are taught about Thanksgiving much in the same way that they were taught when I was a kid, where it was like, oh yeah, the Pilgrims and the Indians were all great and everybody shared maize and wasn't it wonderful? And there's no mention of smallpox blankets anywhere. So I really appreciate that, you know, as we're talking about these things, there are going to be uncomfortable parts, right? But it's not nearly as uncomfortable to talk about as it was to experience. So just think about it in those terms as like, this is kind of the least you can do to be aware of this thing that happened, as opposed to just thinking, well, we were all terrible, so I don't have to worry about it. It's like, no, you kind of do. These are important, you know, got to know context and that kind of stuff. Okay, let's talk about the workplace as it relates to many Indigenous cultures and Indigenous people. There can be some pretty big barriers, right? Between coming from a very specific cultural situation that maybe was not at all represented or considered when a lot of these workplace, like, you know, processes and things were put into place. So let's talk about some of the challenges that Indigenous people might face when they're navigating the work world. You know, what are some common challenges that they might face, and how those things kind of have to be handled?
Sure. So Indigenous people overall are nearly 3 times as likely to be living in extreme poverty compared to non-Indigenous communities. So globally, less than half, so about 47% of Indigenous people in employment have no education or lack of access to educational resources compared to the other percentage of non-Indigenous counterparts. And the gap for women or Indigenous women is even larger in that sense. So as you continue to add on the barriers to workplace development and leadership and access to workplace opportunities and job opportunities, that is increasingly going to get bigger for Indigenous communities because of the systemic history that we have experienced. So that is the huge barrier, that there are not many of us within the workplace, within the larger global companies that we need to be represented in, because from a recruitment standpoint, it's hard to identify Indigenous populations that have that secondary education or have access to have that. So within our company, and I'm lucky enough that my director and I are both Native Hawaiian, leading a market within a area that we have ancestral ties to. That is huge, and something that I don't think I've ever dreamed of in the entire decade that I've worked at Expedia. But what an amazing opportunity to have people with Indigenous and ancestral ties to the places that we are working and contributing to, and how impactful that is in the long-term strategies of our company. So maybe we don't drive as many travelers, and we try to find more opportunities that we can better educate our travelers to the destinations that we live in and that we are a part of. That doesn't happen that often, and it's a rarity that exists. But if it did, the work and having a seat at the table is going to be the biggest overall impactful strategy. But overall, the barrier to have access to that is an issue on its own, right? So what goes back to education, the education and opportunities for our Indigenous youth to be able to have access to the resources for these companies and organizations such as Power to Fly that are connecting underrepresented communities to these opportunities is key in that work moving forward.
Yeah, and a big area as well is also that identification piece, right? Because it's illegal in a lot of countries to ask people if they identify as Indigenous or not. So we also face, as a business, that obstacle as well with both our employees and our talent acquisition as to whether or not we can ask those questions. And I think self-identification is always like the most inclusive approach, rather than like singling people out and that sort of thing. So we do allow opportunities for that, but we celebrate intersectionality as well. And it's because there's not a lot of Indigenous people within the business. Often the intersectional opportunities to identify as well might be more prominent, and then they also can get lost in that data if you are looking at it like as a underrepresented hiring goal or something like that. So there are a lot of challenges. So I think the best thing we can do is create like safe communities like the IDEA IBG that we are a part of, to invite people in and to be an ally and to self-identify and to celebrate. And the more we can also create these sort of goals internationally of like hiring targets and that sort of thing is also really important. But purely like I think in the US it's less than 5% of the population identifies as Indigenous. It's similar in Australia and Canada. But then there's populations like Fiji where it's over 50%. I think they're at 56% of their population, but no major companies have major offices there. So I think employment barriers are also geography. In these remote communities, like how can we support them to come to where the work is, or to be more flexible and allow more remote workers. And there's a lot of different avenues to explore within that. But there's a lot of common challenges, like just to name a few.
No, I mean, it makes a ton of sense that, you have to know what your population or what the people look like what is the baseline, right? Because it's very, very easy to just think that, well, yeah, the world I live in is the world. And you don't ever realize that, like, no, you're in a fishbowl inside the ocean. Like, it looks like everything else, but it's not actually. Not everybody is living your reality right now. So yeah, I very much appreciate this focus here. We also got a comment in from Adriana in the chat saying there's so much oral history that gets lost in detribalization in addition to colonialization. And there's something to be said about how the West acknowledges and legitimizes written history, but by dismissing oral history. And that is absolutely 100% accurate. It really is important to think when you're researching and when you're reading things and trying to learn more. History books are written by the victors. So look and see who's writing the history that you're reading. Try and go to Indigenous voices, go to people from within the community, and not just, what the talking head on the History Channel had to say about it. Very, very important.
Well, yeah, because Indigenous people, like in many communities, like the act of storytelling is a huge part of their culture. And so it was not written down. It's passed through ancestors and generations, and that's what forms that like community bond. And I think it's it's celebrated within their community, but in history, oh, it wasn't written. Here's the constitution that the West wrote, and it is difficult because, and it's finding that balance, and celebrating Indigenous authors is a great thing to do as well.
Yes, very, very true.
I think there's been a revitalization of Indigenous culture and a resurgence based on, I think, events that have happened in the last couple of years. So there's been this real active participation in the space, which is super exciting, but it also is a privilege to be able to pass along this oral history, because a lot of Indigenous communities don't have that. I had my best friend visit from Chicago, and she is Taino from Puerto Rico, and she was mentioning we went to a Hawaiian museum and we had so much information and language and music, and she went there and she was crying because she was saying that she didn't have access to this information or have access to this knowledge because it was taken away a lot more violently than I think something that has happened in other Indigenous communities. So like for me being Hawaiian and having access to the storytelling, the chants and the mo'olelos of that have been continuing. The mo'olelo is a story of our people. That is a privilege that I hold dear to my heart, but also an acknowledgement that does not exist for a lot of Indigenous communities. So how we revitalize and resurge this knowledge is from our ancestors, and a lot of that is no longer existing. So again, it's definitely something that we want to continue to build on in the upcoming futures, or else in the next 100 years, there won't be any Indigenous people representing or passing down these stories because we no longer will exist. So yeah, I think that's a great call out in the chat.
Excellent. We also got a couple questions in, so we're going to try and get to those as we can. I'm grabbing all of them that I see, so keep sending them if you've got questions. We'll try and get to as many as we can. All right. So as we're talking about, learning more and educating yourself and reaching out and asking questions, one of the things that is important to remember when it comes to situations like this, like August being, we want to increase awareness of these Indigenous peoples and Indigenous cultures. How do we do that in a way that does not translate to being a burden on the culture we're trying to learn about?
I feel like, Malia, I know we've spoken in the past, like because the whole act of tokenism can be a problem. I think I'll let Malia speak to this.
And so, as we mentioned, Grace and I are leading the IDEA board, and we have the keen perspective of an ally and an Indigenous person. Prior to, there were only 2 Indigenous people on our board, and even a smaller percentage overall in the greater company, which we are actively trying to recruit for. So with that, I think personally being tapped on the shoulder a lot to answer different questions for Indigenous populations, maybe specific to Central America or Australia, that we may not have all of the information for. I'm very familiar with my culture, but that is just one in the thousands, if not millions, of Indigenous communities. So with that, it's yes, leaning on your Indigenous communities to learn, but also finding additional communities to further that knowledge and to further that information. And if you can't find a community, you can create one to really understand that, because we are a very small population and we do require the amplifying from our allies for our voices. To ensure that we are heard with the few of us that there are. We severely rely on our allies to amplify that in every way, shape, or form. So,
and as a travel company, we have a duty to work with Indigenous owned businesses as well in the travel space, and partner with Indigenous tourism boards that excel in this space as well, and learn from them and learn from community. And I think bringing that like authentic travel experience to our employees and our travelers is also a way to engage and learn from the Indigenous communities without necessarily having representatives. And taking a step away from always tapping Malia on the shoulder to having the opportunity to learn and collaborate with partners and creating those relationships like externally from the business and learning from the sources all across the world, as opposed to just specific regions where we happen to have an office or an employee, and taking that burden off of them as well, so that we can all be on this journey together rather than singling out individuals.
And I think just one more thing to add, outside of Indigenous communities, if you are feeling that you are a person of tokenism in whatever respective community that you represent, at this, and I fight myself with this all the time, but I have to say that at the end of the day, if it's not your voice being heard, someone is going to speak on your behalf. So if that is the motivation that you need to continue that idea of being the only resource, like that is our responsibility. That is my Puliana, which is to further that. And if someone isn't speaking for me, then I'd rather speak for myself and change that narrative to my personal perspective. So that's sometimes the motivation that we need when you're feeling that you are the burden of that voice within your community. And I think that's applicable to any URI or any community that you represent too.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, we had a question in the chat. I've got some links I'm going to send as well, but could we try and give a breakdown of appreciation versus appropriation? I've got some quick examples, but I want to hear from both of you. If you're trying to educate people on the difference between, what would you tell them first and foremost?
I think after COVID, a lot of people are looking for like a more authentic experience in their life, especially in their travel. And it's really helping this cause of appreciation versus appropriation, because I think that naturally people are doing that, I could call it like a soul search, and they're really finding that that connection to land organically. So I do think that that's important to call out, because it's definitely something as a travel company that we've noticed from our travelers, in that search for something more authentic, and so it makes it easier for people to want to engage with these communities if they have a more of an and keep using the word authentic, there's no better word for it, more of an authentic reason to do so, right? And so that has helped, but I think in terms of appropriation, we have to be really careful as business in our like marketing, for example, that we're not just putting this goes for any minority group, right? Like, we're not just putting a picture up because it looks pretty. If we put a picture of the Maasai village in Africa, like, we're not the Maasai people. We're not just putting the photo because it's like nice and colorful, right? Like, we want to make sure that it's attached to education about what that community is, who they are, how you can engage authentically, which that information only comes from them. So I think that it's important to, as a business, if we look at it from that lens, to not just we appreciate by providing extra insight, extra education, and extra opportunity to engage authentically with those communities as people are traveling, and not just posting a picture because we want to look like we're supporting X community.
Yeah, there's a line there.
I can give an example of that too. Like in Australia, we have a brand called What If, and they actually have a First Nations travel hub that we recognize that we didn't have enough businesses identified as being Indigenous owned or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander owned. So we partnered with an external company to power some of the content on that landing page, because we wanted to make sure it was authentic and appreciative of the community rather than just appropriating. And it's knowing where you might fall short, so that, but for the common goal, you want to move forward. And so it sometimes involves working with others, and that's okay, and that's encouraged.
I think that's a good point. You know, appreciation is going to center the culture or center the people as opposed to yourself. are you excited about this and you want to post a picture because you learned something? Or are you excited about this because it's a great accessory, or you think you look amazing, or it puts you on trend or something like that? It really is important to know the difference and to understand that, like, there doesn't have to be a huge difference. You just have to learn some things and center them, not yourself. Yeah. Oh, please go ahead.
No, I was going to say just a great example of that. And I'm sure everyone in their respective workplaces or somewhere in school or somewhere had a Hawaiian day, or like Aboriginal Day, or Native American Day, and it is the biggest representation of appropriation possible. So I think it's very easy events that we have partaked in Halloween costumes, everything like that, that is evolved and is part of our everyday, and just taking another step and another keen interest to understand what communities could be impacted by this. And if I was in this community, how would I feel if I saw XYZ, right? So I think there's been a heightened awareness of the Indigenous groups and the movies or appropriation of certain areas to really take into effect. And without that education piece, again, really keying in on this education, but without that, you won't really have the knowledge to understand and identify what is the difference between appreciation and appropriation, because a lot of that you don't even have the information for. So it's additionally taking that step to find more out.
Yes. Love this. Okay. We only have 4 minutes left in today's session. I want to make sure that we saved a little bit of time at the end to talk a little bit more about Expedia Group. So one of the questions that I wanted to touch on here was your top tip for someone who is interviewing. Would you say that this is applicable? Like, is this like Expedia Group specific, or do you think that this tip or these tips apply no matter where you're interviewing?
I think no matter where you apply, I think just given the fact you're on this call shows that you really care about this space. And I think that I wouldn't want to work for a company where you couldn't be your authentic self. I think that Expedia's values really align with the opportunity to be your authentic self. So yeah, I think that it's unique to Expedia, but also can be, I'm not sure you'd want to work anywhere where you couldn't have these things.
Yeah, very good point. All right. The other thing I wanted to touch on here was your favorite parts about working at Expedia Group. So Grace, sorry to hammer on you again, but can you explain more about what you mean by endless opportunities?
Yeah, I think that the company has so many cool and amazing opportunities to engage in the inclusion and diversity space. And like with the boards that we have with our IBGs and or EIGs, if you call them that within your company, and it's so cool to be able to meet people from all over the world and collaborate with them on a meaningful, impactful cause outside of your day role. So with our inclusion business groups, we can actually allocate 10% of our core working time to serving the board and our communities. And I think that that's where a lot of endless opportunity grows from, because you can get really bogged down in your little day job, but really like meeting people from all across the business opens opportunities to create a safer place for people to work, but also from your personal network and your own growth and development opens so many opportunities and for collaboration that you wouldn't have had otherwise, and networks for mentors and things like that. It's really incredible that it serves sort of both of those needs of the community and then also your growth and development.
Yes, of course. All right, we are almost to the end of time. I just want to say a quick thank you, Malia and Grace. Thank you both for taking time out of your day to be here with us today. Thank you so much for all the obvious prep work that y'all put into this before today's event started. We really appreciate you sharing your time and your expertise with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Mahalo.
It's been great.
All right, y'all. This is going to bring us to the end of time, but I do want to say a big thank you to our audience members as well. Obviously, I wouldn't have a job without you, but more importantly, y'all come to these events and you do something positive for yourselves and your career. Okay, that's not easy. You took time out of your day to do that. You should be rewarded for that. So whether you are a little star person, get yourself a little treat, cookie, whatever it is, really, truly pat yourselves on the back. This was, something that you didn't have to do and you took time to do it. So congratulations. If this was your first Power to Fly event, I really hope it will not be your last. If you're one of our frequent flyers, I cannot wait until we get to see y'all again. Have a safe, happy, healthy rest of your day, week, and weekend. And can't wait to see you back here on another Power to Fly virtual event. Bye, y'all.